Kia ora koutou. Thank you for joining us today for our Lunch and Learn session. Um, we are For Purpose. My name is Anna Jackson, and I'm going to be supporting the session alongside my colleague Zenaida. Zenaida is going to be keeping an eye on all the technical things, an eye on the chat. So feel free during the session to share your thoughts or comments on the chat, and I'll also be helping to moderate the Q&A session at the end. So we are For Purpose. We are an agency that amplifies and elevates the voices of communities and socially led organizations working to achieve positive outcomes for people and planet. And we have these monthly lunch and learn sessions to foster a sense of community and collective learning. And we're always keen to hear from you about what you're enjoying in these sessions, what you would like to hear from in future. And what we heard from people is that they would love to know more about how they can do better measuring with purpose, understanding social impact measurement. And so we are so pleased today to have Dr. Ana Fernandez with us to talk about measuring with purpose and sharing her knowledge and inviting you all also to participate in a conversation today about measuring with impact. So I'm going to open the session today with a karakia, and then I will hand over to Ana. Tuia ki rongo, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, tuia ki te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, haumie, kuie, whae ki e. So, kia ora koutou. Welcome to people who have just joined the session now. Um, I'm going to keep an eye on the chat, and so if you have any questions or thoughts during the session, um, feel free to add them to the chat. If anybody needs captions, you can activate captions at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see the option at the moment, just click on More at the bottom right, just before leave, and you should see captions. Click on that, and it will activate live captions for the session. So I'll hand over now to Anna, and she will take over, and we'll have Q&A at the end. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thanks everybody for joining. I see some friendly faces that I would just kind of like want to reach out and hug through the screen. Thank you everybody for joining. And I'm just gonna do a really quick introduction. I'm just gonna mostly share why I'm passionate about this type of mahi, of work, rather than my life story, and a little bit about how I got here so that we can find meaningful connections. And then I'm going to keep my bit of the presentation fairly brief. I'm just going to share some pointers that I think we can use to make sense of all of this. I don't want to say pressure. I think I'm going to say noise that is going on around measurement and impact and what is meaningful and what it's not. And then what I would like to do is to leave space at the end to have a kōrero, to have a conversation, and just invite the wisdom in the room to just flow so that we can all learn from each other. I don't want this to be like a one-sided thing. So, kia ora koutou, hola a todos y todas. My name is Ana Fernandez. I am from Havana, Cuba. So I am Ana from Havana. It's a thing. Very far away from home. Aotearoa, New Zealand is my home now. I've been here for 10 years, and I came to study to do my PhD in social science. My background is in comms and design, actually. And then I felt a calling towards the social sciences because I found myself being very interested in the stories, but always wanting to go under the hood about how change had come to be. And then the PhD journey was an amazing way of coming across very interesting ways of building knowledge. But then academia wasn't really my calling. So I've used most of that working alongside change makers in the social action space and bringing that sort of knowledge building, measurement, evaluation tools and hacking them so that they can be fit for purpose for the realities of how change actually happens, which is messy. And oftentimes we don't have a lot of budget or time or resources. So that's me. What today is all about, we are going to go pretty basic because my intention is that we are going to get some navigation tools so that we only have an hour together. And I think that there's only so much that we can do in an hour. So I don't want to stuff it too much with content that you can find anywhere. So let's just go and try and find some navigation tools that we can use to make sense of things. So before we jump into the content part, I want to know a little bit more about you. So fingers crossed for technology working. I'm just going to share my screen and go into Mentimeter. It's a really nifty tool that we are going to use our phones. If you have it handy, if not, Katapai, that's okay. We are going to go in here and scan the QR code with your camera, just as you would with any QR code. And that is going to take you into a little screen on your phone that is going to enable you to respond to a couple of quick questions so that we can all have a bit of a notion about who is in the room, who we are, what we're interested in. And then that's also going to help me make sure that I am meeting you where you're at. Thank you for hitting that like button, that we know that most people have been able to join. Just going to give it a couple more seconds to scan that QR code. If you're having issues with the QR code for some reason, you can always go into the website here, www.menti.com, and you're going to be asked to enter a code. So you can use this code here to do that. Okay, a couple more seconds. And I think most of us are already in. All right. So the first question is your role or your area of work. We had quite a diverse signups, which is really fantastic because it means that we're going to be coming at this whole thing from very different perspectives. Great. That's awesome. So we've got quite a few service providers or change makers, quite a few of, we really do need to find a better term to define ourselves, right? In terms of kind of like consultants, kind of like quite a bit of like partners in purpose. That's what we are. And advisors, we've got one person from government, few researchers, which is amazing, one funder. Great. That's so good to have so many different perspectives. So then the next question, and I know that this may be a tricky one, so go with your gut. Don't overthink this one. And this is such a continuous learning process because everything is changing so quickly. So I'm just asking you a couple of questions. The first one is, how would you rate your own knowledge about outcomes and impact measurement? And that's the first one. And then the second one is your organization's ability to measure effectively. And sometimes they are one and the same. Sometimes some things get in the way of the knowledge actually landing in effective measurement systems. So we're going from seedling to fruit. Good. So we're sort of in the middle of that learning journey, which is a great place to be because we've already started thinking about these things. We're asking ourselves questions, but we're still seeing that opportunity to increase that knowledge. So hopefully we're going to do a little bit of that today. Awesome. So we're just going to change my screen. Thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful. It's going to be this one again, but we're going to come out in a second. All right, so before we move into the presentation itself, the whole Kopapa of measuring with purpose, it's that part is really important for me, and it's going to be really important for what we're going to be sharing today. And it is the core question about why measure. Why would we even go about thinking about the measurement part or the data part of the work that we're doing around driving change alongside communities, right? And there's two sides to that conversation. There is obviously the importance of understanding whether or not the design of the service or the intervention that we are putting out in the world is landing as we are expecting it to land. So it's the internal drive to measure. And then when we are measuring with that purpose, then the process of deciding what data matters, how we're going to analyze it, and how we're going to use it for improvement, then that has there are some ways and some methodologies to do that. And then when the incentive to measure is to engage stakeholders, funders, external partners, then hopefully the data will come from the same place. It would still come from that core purpose of the organization, but it has a slightly different tone to it. So what I invite you to keep in the back of your head is that when you're thinking about measurement, keep in mind the purpose of why you're going about collecting data, analyzing it, and how you intend to use it at the end. Because one thing that happens is that sometimes, particularly when teams are stretched and the pressure is high and the resources are scarce, a lot of the time then the pressure to measure comes from an external perspective. And when we are measuring with that incentive alone, a lot of the time we may miss out on the opportunity to learn from the data that we are collecting and from the evidence. So you keep that kind of like underlying questions in the back of your head as we go. Why are you interested in measuring? And it's usually a combination of both. So before we start the conversation, we're just gonna, because there's so much conversation going on about this all the time, that I want to make sure that we have some terms of reference that we all are very clear about what we mean. So starting, we're going to be talking about the building blocks of what effective measurement looks like, because the conversation is never about data. Data is almost like the tip of an iceberg, that unless it is connected with other meaningful components of how a social service or an intervention is designed, delivered, improved, the data just kind of like becomes disconnected from that core. So we're going to be talking about purposeful design for programs, then thinking about outputs, and outputs have a really bad reputation about kind of like as that sort of meaningless thing that you count when you cannot measure outcomes. But I do think that there is value in measuring outputs and having outputs with a kind of like there's a point to them. Then we're going to be really focusing on outcomes, because I do believe that outcomes are a powerhouse of generating meaningful evidence in the world of purpose work. And then we're going to have a conversation about impact and the system, and what is our role as organizations, as supporters, as researchers in contributing to that more systemic, wider change that we cannot attribute to one single intervention, but that we're all hopefully contributing towards. So that's going to be it. This is kind of like a portal that we've created with layers. So you just kind of like take yourself there. And the point of, so here we're going to be talking about the different layers of change that we may be thinking about when we are implementing a social program or a social intervention. And we have an inner layer that is very closely connected with the activities that we do as a program or as an organization. You, at some point, generated the design of a program, or you are delivering a service for government, but there is a thinking. It may be explicit in a theory of change or in a logic model, or it may be implicit because it may have been designed a while ago. But in that design, in the way in which that program is designed, there is an underlying logic as to how that program is going to generate the change that we hope it is going to generate. So most of the time, with the type of work that we do, you're going to be engaging people. you're going to be engaging participants in some sort of activity. It may be workshops, capability building, coaching, peer-to-peer, mentorships, anything, whatever it may be, home visiting. So things are going to happen, like real things that are going to happen throughout the week, throughout the month, that constitute the activities of your organization. And that those specific activities are going to drive a little bit of change depending on the size of the width and breadth of your intervention. Something is going to change. Hopefully somebody's going to gain knowledge, somebody's going to increase their confidence about something, some attitudes will be shifted, some values may change. It depends on what you're aiming to do. And those outcomes that you can directly connect with some confidence to your intervention, and that have a logic connection to the design of your program, where you go, well, we're doing this so that this happens, then this is where outcomes live. So they are here. They're in this inner layer that you can confidently measure and say, well, has it changed? And then participants can directly report and tell you, yes, it has, or no, it really hasn't. So this layer is really important. We're going to be focusing on this a lot, but there's other changes, the ripples that work that you're doing here is going to generate in Fano, community, the system, the ecosystem, and society at large. So what I want you to think about, because I think that one of the reasons why sometimes outcomes measurement or measurement, like measuring change in general, can feel a bit confusing, is that sometimes we don't have a lot of clarity about which layer we are trying to measure and why, and which layer we as change makers, as organizations, as researchers have the ability to measure directly. So what I invite you to reflect on is in how, and this is a slider, right? It's not black and white. Sometimes you do have access quite confidently to data about the change that you're driving in Fano. So this is not a black and white thing, but what I invite you to think about is that the further out you go in these layers, the more factors and the more complex the influences are going to be in how change is driven. And the further away it's going to go from your actions as an organization and from the effects of your program. So when you are talking about the change that individual participants can report back to you, you can quite confidently say, well, we may not have been fully driven by you, but we have contributed quite confidently to that change. And then as it goes out, then you're making a lot of assumptions, sometimes based in research, sometimes based in lived experience, but you're making quite a lot of assumptions about how this change that happened here in your course, in your mentorship program, had an effect on these layers of the system. So when in connection with your program design as well, the outcomes is the change that happens, of course, as a result of what you're doing. And then the outputs are the things that you can count. So the number of participants that showed up, the number of workshops that you conducted, the number of website visits, if you're trying to shift awareness or social media engagement. So it's the things that you can count. And sometimes when you are counting them without thinking too much about what is a meaningful result, like why do we want to reach 500 people? Is that meaningful? Is that necessary for achieving the change that we want to achieve? Or is it just because we want to impress the funder? Because sometimes, depending on the COPAP, depending on the content of the program, sometimes the scale doesn't mean wider, it means deeper. It means working with a small number of people, but going really deep and contributing to really deep change. So I invite you to think about your outputs in connection with your purpose, and not thinking about, let's just try and reach more and more people, whatever it takes, right? So then as we move out from this inner layer of change and we move out into the outer ripple effects of the change that we're doing, in the inner layers, we can pretty much talk about attribution. So we can attribute some of those changes, particularly when we are engaging with participants directly and they are attributing the change to our work or to their partnership with us. Then we're talking about attribution. The further out we go into the outer layers of this change that we're generating, then we're really thinking about contribution. We contribute to impact. That's why sometimes I find that, whereas attribution in terms of measurement, pragmatically, it's easier to measure because you have access to the people that you partner with for that change, and you can ask. There are ways you can distribute surveys, you can do focus groups, you can do one-on-one, you can hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And as you go out, then the impact becomes harder to measure, because then you have to reach more people, you have to do more complex studies. It needs to be measured over time. But a lot of the time, smaller organizations may not have the resources to measure in those layers. So I would invite you to think, if you're aiming to measure in these outer layers, why? What is the purpose of doing that? How is that going to contribute to your purpose? And then as a final reflection in this slide, I like to think about outcomes. When we're talking about outcomes, I think measurement is an accurate word. You can find the tools, you can decide how you want to go about doing it, you can confidently measure it. I think impact measurement, it's a little bit dodgy, because measurement for me, it sounds like you can accurately pinpoint impact to a measurement framework. And I think that because there's so many intertwining factors and forces at play, I think we are talking more about analysis rather than measurement. It's not really something that we can just pinpoint and go, this is the impact that we did have. And I think that when we allow ourselves to think about impact as a process of analysis, of sense making, particularly collective sense making with others who are also contributing to the change in these outer layers, I think that that opens up a more interesting conversation than trying to attach numbers to results. So now what the next part of the conversation is going to be about is in thinking about, very tempting when you start thinking about measurement to go straight to the conversation about data and what data you're going to collect, how you're going to collect it, what questions you're going to ask, how you're going to build the surveys, what technology you're going to use for analyzing. But what I invite you to think about is that unless that data is connected with all of the different components of the intervention of the organization that you're working with, and with purpose at the center, then that data is going to have very little meaning. And data is expensive in terms of the resources that you need to use, the time that you need, that it demands from Kaimahi, from people working on the ground to collect it. It is expensive because sometimes you have to bring external advisors to go through it and process it. So when you are working and investing in getting data, it needs to be really meaningful. And not only that, it's not just expensive for the organization. Data is a taonga, it's a treasure. It's gifted to us by the people who are living the stories. They are sharing their experiences. They are sharing parts of their lives. So when that data has purpose and it contributes to the improvement of the services that our participants are receiving, then there is a sense of reciprocity, right? They're not just giving us our data so we can turn it into numbers and report it. We can find a way of channeling that data back into improving the services that we are providing. So, and for that to happen, the data that we are collecting needs to be in line with the design that we're putting out there. So are we checking, are we thinking about the effectiveness of that design? Is it landing? Is it working for people? Which areas are not working, so that we can then go back to the drawing board and think about, why isn't this shifting, right? So at the level of the program design, when you think about designing with purpose, it's about questioning it, keeping that little bit of uncertainty and not being too sure that your program is just going to go out and hit the ground and change everything, because it may not. When we are designing, we're only working with the information that we do have. And as we know, the world changes so quickly and so dramatically that a lot of the time we need to keep checking in and wondering, is this something that we can improve? So it's at that level of program design, is keeping the data connected with the design and vice versa. And then at the outputs level is a clear understanding about who this work and this program is for, and are they coming through the door? So it's not just about counting heads in a workshop, it's that are the people that can benefit the most from this work, are they showing up? And if they're not showing up, then something's up. Something's happening, that they are not feeling like this work is for them, or that this space is for them. And then if so, how can we make it more open? And how can we make it more clear that this is for them? Then we're going to be talking a little bit more about outcomes in a minute, but then that's the next layer up, that is asking not who is coming and how much are we doing, but is something changing as a result of that, Mahi? And then outcomes, I think we can probably think about them in terms of the short term. So the immediate change was knowledge increased, Was confidence improved? Were attitudes shifted? And then we can also probably over time talk with people and say, did something change in your funnel? Did something change in your workplace, in your communities? And people can still come back to us and tell us. But then that upper layer of that connected system is the impact and is the changes that we see in society. And that is the part that is harder to measure. However, I think that as organizations, in practical terms, the system can feel sometimes out of place and something that is, something for researchers to think about. But when you put the humans that you're working with at the center of your thinking, and you think about, okay, so I'm working with this person in sort of like a youth employability program, but what else is going on in their lives that is influencing whether or not they are making the best of the resources that we're sharing, of the knowledge that we're sharing? So don't think about the system with a big S, like the whole world that you cannot influence and feels too big. Just think about that human and think about what else is going on in their lives. And how can we consider that, even if we cannot support with housing or domestic violence, it's not your co-papa, it's not your thing. But there's two things that you need to consider. Who is doing that? What are the organizations that you can reach out and connect and partner with so that you can you don't have to do it yourself, but others are probably doing it. And when you think about that, really good opportunities for collaboration can emerge. And the other thing is that if you don't consider those other factors and those other forces that are going on in those people's lives, then your design may be missing some kind of like very obvious levers for success. Just to give you an example, if you're designing for a cohort of kindergarten teachers that are stressed out, underpaid, under pressure, and you design a really complex, over-engineered program that they're expected to deliver after hours before dinner, it's not going to land. So you need to think about kind of like, what is the context in which you are delivering? And that is systems thinking. So moving on from here, I've just kind of like put this here as a reminder that I'm going to share a little resource with some reflective questions about each of these levels of effective measurement that you can bring back to your teams and that you can use if you want to kind of like do a deeper thinking about these layers. But for the sake of time and to make sure that we leave space for conversation at the end, we're just going to move on. And so I just want to spend a little bit of time with outcomes, because again, like I said, for me, the thing that makes outcomes very exciting is that they have great power for improvement, because they are directly connected with the work that you're doing and directly connected with your design. They can be used quite easily without too much fuss and technology. They can be used quite easily as an improvement, to inform improvement loops. And that is, I think, a few things happen when you think about outcomes like that and you take them a little bit further than that end of year report that you need to hand in. First thing that happens is that your staff, like people who work in your organization, even if it's just a team of 3, whoever is in charge of collecting that data, when they can see how that data connects with their work and how that data makes the work better, that person who is collecting the data is going to be interested in collecting data that has high quality. So when staff gets interested and curious about data, the quality of the data improves, because they're going to be transmitting and sharing that curiosity and that passion and that meaning with the people who are gifting the data. And that's really important, because even if the system is really good, if the data is not real and people are just ticking boxes without any meaning attached to it, then you're going to be having very kind of like very nifty graphs without lots of meaning connected to it. So I think that's really important. And the other thing that happens is that even from a reporting perspective, you can show not only that you have data and that you have evidence, but that evidence is being continually used for improvement and to drive that cumulative impact over time. So here are some questions that connect with outcomes that you can always keep in mind as you're thinking about what is the system that we're going to use to figure this out. Is what specific changes are participants attributing to your program? And again, outcomes are not a theoretical thing. They're not something that you can sort of attach to your design. Well, you might when you're designing the intervention initially, but then they have to come from the people. It is the changes that people are attaching and identifying as a consequence of the partnership of the engagement and the involvement that they had with your organization. Then it's really important to also keep that kind of like that curiosity lens on and go, how will I know what changed? But also importantly, how will I know what did not change? Or what change happened that I was not expecting? So, because when you have measurement structures that are too strict and too prescriptive, it may be that you're missing out on some stories of change that may not be the consequence that you were designing for, but may nevertheless be very meaningful for the people that you're working with. You may be running a Te Reo course and people may be learning a whole bunch of Te Reo Maori, but they may be actually showing up for the community component. They may be showing up because they want to hang out with the people that also show up. And that may be connecting with a deeper layer of the lives of those people that may be beyond the learning component of the kaupapa. So always keep that in mind and keep checking in with people. Make sure that the instruments and the tools that you're using for data collection allow for that wide capture of change. Then once you have collected that and you have made sense of it, it's always keeping that question, what does this mean for the program design? Is there something that we can optimize? Is there something that we can improve? And then, well, again, we already talked about that. Oh, is it meaningful to participants? Is it not just ticking our boxes? It's not just, did the change that we expected happen? Did it mean anything for those people that came along with us for the journey? And then what about unexpected changes? So there are some really good tools that I have used that I have seen immense value in. And we're going to talk about qualitative versus quantitative in a minute, because I know that that's in people's mind at the moment. But I really want to make it very clear that the tool follows the purpose. So it depends on what you want to find out. It depends on why that data is necessary and what is the question that you have. And we have fantastic qualitative evaluators and researchers in the room, and you can answer so many questions with narratives without the need of collecting huge amounts of quantitative data. But sometimes quantitative data has a way of having that quick turnaround that you can use to find the trailheads that you can then go deeper and explore. So try and stay away from the kind of like data wars of quantitative versus qualitative, because usually, as in many cases, the answer is somewhere in the middle and in combining many different tools with your purpose in mind, right? So thinking about, there are fantastic indigenous frameworks that have been gifted for general use, like Hotu Waka pathfinding tools that are out there for anybody to use, that enable you to have that wide lens to capture journeys of change, when and if appropriate. Measuring before and after the program is a really handy way of measuring change, when that is appropriate for the design and for the communities that you're working with. Having any way, it may be a survey, maybe an interview, it may be a conversation, but doing something before the work is done, then doing the mahi, going through the journey, and then checking in again and seeing what shifted before and after is really fantastic. Bringing in those participant reflections, having observation tools for things that may not come out in conversation, that people may not be able to verbalize, but that you can observe. And then having interviews, feedback sessions. So it depends. So the tool isn't really that important as the intention is. So in here, I'm just going to go through some of the questions that you submitted. I'm just going to check the time. Going to be moving on very quickly. A few of the questions that you guys asked about was around the purpose of turning everything and mapping everything to a dollar value, and how valid and how desirable it is to think about change in terms of measure, in terms of the money that it costs. So I think that I don't have the definitive answer to that. I do think that every one of us has the responsibility of using the resources that we do have responsibly to drive as much change as possible. I do think that we have to separate the conversation about efficiency from the conversation about effectiveness, because something being efficient doesn't mean that it is effective. I think that the conversation about the resources that are used and how they're used responsibly needs to be woven with how effective is that kaupapa versus how much it costs. Is it landing as it should? Is it driving the change? Is the change sustainable? Not just how can we reach more people for less dollars? So I think that is something that needs to be, I think, negotiated and thought through from the perspective of each individual organization. And I do think that when the pressure to do that is coming from the funder, I do think that many funders are shifting out of that transactional view to a more relational, learning-oriented conversation about how resources are used. So what I would invite you to do is to try and have a conversation with the funder rather than think, well, this is what they're asking for. I think that we just have to go ahead and do it. Just try and make sense with them about what is it that they want to know, because it may be that they don't have any other tools, or they don't have any other way of thinking about change. So you can have a conversation and negotiate and find a place that is meaningful for you both. The other conversation that we did have is about Kaupapa Maori and indigenous services, indigenous actions, methodologies, and how do we bridge that when kaupapa or services are iwi-based and they need to be, the reports or the reporting needs to be sort of generated in a Western context. And I think that is that would be an excellent topic for our next Launch and Learn. So I'm just gonna scratch the surface, and I'm gonna bring an amazing framework that I came across a while ago, but I still keep it in my mind, which is the framework called the Braided Rivers by Andrew McFarlane. And it has to do with weaving sources of knowledge, but keeping each standing in their own manner. So instead of trying to translate indigenous frameworks that are by nature systemic, complex, narrative, relational, instead of trying to translate all of that into a Western framework, it may be a matter of weaving those two sources of knowledge and then those two ways of sense making, and keeping each standing in their own worldview, but weaving them meaningfully for the sake of making sure that we are communicating effectively with funders who may not have the deep indigenous knowledge to understand indigenous frameworks deeply. It's that weaving that I have found very useful when I have had to do work like that. I think the last one that I'm going to talk about is talking about the hard to measure changes. So how do we measure emotions, values, culture? How do we avoid, because measurement is quite having quite a spotlight moment. How do we avoid only measuring what's easy to measure and leaving out things that are extremely important but harder to measure and harder to pinpoint? And again, I think that we can all have a go at sharing some insights about that. But what I would say is that try and use different ways of measuring. Combine, when you have to collect data, try and combine the narrative with the numbers, if you do have to use the numbers, and let people design what change means for them, rather than trying to define what emotions means to your, or values means to your organization. Try and hear it from the people that are coming and joining your journey. And I think that people do know what changes quite deeply. It's just a matter of creating the space for that knowledge to come through. Then I'm not gonna go through each of them. I'm gonna share this in the resources, but I also want you to keep in mind questions that can influence the quality of the data that you're using. And the questions are about the why are you measuring? So what is the purpose of the measurement? Are you just ticking a box? Is it really necessary? Is the resource that you're using proportional to the work that you're doing? What is it that you're measuring? And are the tools fit for purpose to unearth that information? How are you doing that? Are you using the right tools? Are the right people going out in the community and building the relationships to do that? Is the data meaningful? The data is good data is based on good relationships. It's not floating in space. It's not just a transactional thing. Otherwise, the data doesn't really mean anything if it gets disconnected from the relationships that hold it. And finally, when you have that data and you're sharing it with others, are you sharing it in a way that tells your story and that connects people meaningfully with your purpose? And then finally, what I wanted to say, almost to finish up and pass it on to Q&A, to Anna for Q&A, is that Think about outcomes, going back to outcomes specifically. Think about outcomes as that tool that enables you to keep an eye on what's changing cohort by cohort, week by week, month by month. And then that what's going to happen if you start measuring like that is that the data is going to stack up and you're going to start seeing patterns. And those patterns, when they accumulate over time, they're going to have sort of like trail hits. They're going to create like blinking lights that make you want to ask more and make you want to go deeper. And then when you have identified those trailheads, there are so many incredibly deep and useful tools, different ways and methodologies of narrative evaluation, developmental evaluation, one and case studies, reflective practice tools that can help you go deep into those trailheads and understand what's in there. But don't underestimate the power of those kind of like quick and dirty sources of data, because they're not perfect, because they're not meaningful or deep enough, because they can help you identify where it's worth going into a deeper exploration. And then this is something that I saw the other day and made me laugh, which is this is what frameworks capture, and this is more or less what actual change looks like. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using frameworks, that we shouldn't be using tools. It means that we should be using the tools like a map. When you think about a map, it never reflects the full complexity of reality, but they're really good tools for navigation. They're really good tools for setting a direction and trying to find your way through the complexity, because the answer is never to not ask the questions. And I think that's it. That's all I've got. I'm just gonna come out of this screen. I'm just gonna share this QR code later. I'm just offering everybody in the call a half an hour time to meet with me if they want to follow up, if they've got specific questions that you think I can help with. I'm here. Just reach out. We'll share that later on.
Oh, kia ora, Anna. That was fantastic. Lots of things to process, and I just want to note again that Anna's going to share that resource with everybody afterwards, as well as this recording. So I'm going to open up the floor now if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, or you may have reflections or things that you would like to share. Perhaps you have some frameworks that you would like to offer or some ideas that you think would be helpful. So any kōrero is welcome. Also, if you would prefer to just put things into the chat, then feel free to do that.
Come on, it only takes one to get it started.
Okay, while people are processing, I might jump in with a question here. So we work with a lot of organizations who, particularly at this time, are pretty stretched, maybe feeling a little bit overwhelmed with all the things that they have to do. I like that you talked about quick and dirty sources of data. So what are some things that people could do as a kind of really easy entry point to thinking, or perhaps building measurement in to their everyday, regular kind of systems that they use that maybe they might not even be thinking about at the moment as being useful ways of gathering data?
I think the first thing is to start. I think that you almost answer it yourself. It's think about what you're already doing and what comes naturally to your cycles of delivery, to your ways of working, to the dynamics that you already have with your people. Because what happens is that if it's clunky and it doesn't connect with the work that you're doing already, you may do it when you're under pressure to deliver a report or something like that, but then it's just gonna fall. The moment that the pressure goes up, you're not gonna do it. You're not gonna go back to do it. Just think about, we're only humans trying to make it work, right? We think about your own personal life. If you create a system for like going to the gym that requires you to go through 10 different steps before you even go through the door, you're not gonna do it. You're not gonna make it. You have to make it easy for you and for your kind mahi. Now that's easier said than done. It does take quite a bit of reflection. What I can share is that thinking about data and evidence widely, not just in terms of how we're going to get some numbers, but thinking about data and evidence widely and mapping your process of engagement, just doing literally an engagement map, going, somebody contacts us to participate. And then what happens? And then what happens? And you map that whole journey and think about what are some of the opportunities already in that journey to create some little hubs for evidence collection that make sense to them, that are part of the program, and hopefully that bring value to the program, that can be checkpoints for reflection as well as for data collection. That is how I've seen it work more successfully, and very importantly, to be sustained over time. That's one thing. The other thing that I think is very useful is to measure pre and post program, because there is usually a pause before you start and then a pause and celebration at the end. And then at the beginning, people are excited because they're about to go through a journey, an engagement. There's going to be, they are part of that improvement journey. So that is a really fantastic point for reflection. And then at the end, they are excited because they have completed it and they have that sense of accomplishment. So when you think about the people who are coming on board with you in a journey of change as agents of change and not objects of change, you're not changing people. People are coming along and they're partnering, and hopefully together you're going to drive some change. Then you are going to see those checkpoints very clearly. I think that just kind of like thinking, I don't know the answer specifically, but I think keeping those things in mind as you ask the question is useful.
Oh, thank you. Anyone got a question that they'd like to jump in with? I can't see everybody, so feel free to just turn your mic on and ask a question if you would like. Otherwise, I'm going to go with another one. Okay. Um, so you obviously have a real passion for this mahi, and I'm wondering what are some of the things that you have seen that have made you feel really excited about the possibilities of people really embracing measurement, um, and ways that you might have seen people make a real difference in their practice.
I think that what makes me particularly excited, I do see a huge value in meaningful evaluation and in getting support to understand the effects of a program or understanding it as it goes, when, as is the case with developmental evaluation. And I think that the value of having people who can be critical friends coming and supporting that with expertise and externally has huge value. And I also get very excited when those capabilities are built inside the organizations, when Kaimahi staff teams have the tools and the resources and the skills and the strategies to get excited about data. We're not talking about turning everybody into data analysts, but it's just bringing in that curiosity mindset where people can see a data point or see some evidence and connect it with the work that they're going to be doing next Tuesday. That's where I see the spark coming. That's where I see when people can go, oh, actually look at the responses of the workshop participants. I'm just going to use those responses to tailor delivery, because actually what I'm seeing is that these teachers already know quite a lot. They probably don't need a lot of knowledge. We can just skim through and then just go straight to the practice, which I think, so it's that where I see the magic happen is when that connective tissue between the action and the purpose and the data is strengthened. And I do believe that part of that, without kind of like moving value away from people like us who can come in as critical friends and supporters, I think that it is also our role, as well as bringing our skills, it is our role to strengthen that connective tissue and those internal capabilities as well.
Fantastic. So we've got a couple of questions. Thank you. So Kate has asked, how would you describe the valuing in evaluation practice alongside the framework of outcomes and impact?
Thanks, Kate. Would you like to share your thoughts before I share mine? And I seriously would love to hear from you. I can start and then you can share your perspective. How about that? I think that goes back to the conversation that we were having before about trailheads. I think that sometimes I think that what frameworks and outcomes, and that what I refer to as the quick and dirty, quick turnaround data that you can get, for example, from pre and post surveys, they sort of create little blinking lights and trailheads that then you can go back to a conversation with your community and with your people to then find and understand what are the value components of that. So for example, you may see that in a dashboard or in a framework, you may see that in terms of confidence, there was quite a big shift. We don't know what that means. Even when you look at a widget and you go, it went from 3.1 to 4.8. Well, but we don't know what that means until we go and we ask the people that say that change had happened. What does that mean for you? Like, how come that happened? What is the meaning of it? And what is the value that that brings into your life? How do you value that change? Because the change may have happened, but may not mean anything. So I think that is an excellent point of remembering to go back and check in and ask people about value and meaning. Even if you already are seeing the numbers, it's kind of like not staying there, but going deeper. That's what I mean by finding the trailheads and then exploring and going deeper into that. Kate, would you like to share a little bit more about that?
Sure. I briefly, thanks, Anna. I guess it's one of the things in my evaluation practice that it's in the word evaluation, right? That word value. So if we're doing this work, then we need to be focusing on value. And I think sometimes we can get caught up. Anna talked about impact being at that far end of her framework, and how sometimes we want to go straight there and we want to look at the big system. And I think sometimes focusing on impact can sometimes be a distraction when we're working on the ground, because actually what we're looking for is how valuable the stuff we're doing is. We ask the question, how valuable is it? And we set up the systems and processes to be able to check in about value all the way along. At the output phase, we're really talking about, quite often we're talking about value that already exists in a program. It's inherent in the program. It's in the people. It's in the resources. The value of those things is there, and we need to somehow document. And then when we get to our kind of outcomes or activities, sometimes it's potential value that's being created, like we're kind of creating conditions for value to be created. And I bring the word value in because I think it's a shift in the way we talk about this stuff that I think is really important. Yeah, that's my
Thank you, Kate.
2 cents worth.
Donna, we have a question from Diana. How do you balance reporting to funders, considering that some give preference to qualitative rather than quantitative? What type of qualitative impact reporting do you think is powerful?
I think that's a great question. And I kind of would like to take a moment to see if there are funders in the room who would like to contribute to that response. We're just going to share something really quickly and then devolve it kind of like the talk stick back to the room. But I think the most important thing is to keep purpose at the center of reporting, rather than thinking about qualitative versus quantitative, but thinking about telling the story of what you were trying to achieve, how you brought people along for that journey of change, what happened on the way. So kind of like being very transparent about your methodology and your process of change, and then finding ways to, like what Kate was saying, to create those checkpoints and share those checkpoints. And sometimes those checkpoints may be very narrative and may be very qualitative. I think that what sometimes people find, particularly from a funder's perspective, when they receive a really long report, that they have a hard time connecting back to the impact or the purpose that was funded. So I think as long as we are keeping clear the meaning that those stories and those narratives have with the purpose for which the intervention was created or designed or delivered, and how those stories map back to that intention, I think that that narrative report can be as powerful, if not more, than any quantitative or numbers-based reporting. But any funders in the room that would like to share their perspective? I do believe that many funders, particularly, and I'm seeing it more and more with the sort of smaller trusts-based funding that are usually very relational. They tend to be local. They have a very strong trust-based connection with the people that they fund. I see them increasingly moving away from reporting needs or reporting requirements from that into a learning, kind of like a shared learning journey. And the requirement becomes how are we going to know, how are we going to learn together about whether or not this is working. And I think that that is a fantastic thing, because I think funders have a great opportunity to increase their value as backbone organizations, creating the resources and the strategies and the tools that fundees and smaller organizations may not have the resource to create, but funders sometimes do, and supporting those processes of learning so that we are not just putting pressure on the people trying to drive change with already scarce resources, but we are supporting them to have the skills and the tools that they need to learn and improve.
I think that when we've had other sessions about storytelling for impact, we've had a lot of questions about measurement and evaluation. So I think that that storytelling aspect of measurement and evaluation and talking about value is something that people are really keen to explore. So perhaps that's a topic for a future session, which is a way for me to segue into saying that we would love to hear your feedback and to hear about what you would like to explore in future sessions. These are opportunities for us to come together as a community of change makers and learn collectively. So really keen to hear your whakaaro. Thank you so much, Anna. This is a fantastic session. I feel like there is so much for us to unpack and explore, and I'm really excited to dive into the resources that you're going to share with us. Thanks for being so generous with your time and your knowledge and opening up this space for conversation. Kia ora, and kia ora koutou to all of you for coming along today. I'm going to close this out with a karakia. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai a te wāhi ngaro, te aroha o tētahi ki tētahi, me ngā manaakitanga o te wā. Haumie, huie, pai i kie.
Okay. Ka kite.
Kia ora. Ka kite, everyone. See you next time.